All right, so let's turn to a real published example of a factorial design. Another relatively straightforward 2x2 design. We have two independent variables here, dating status of the participant and the type of scenario they read about. So in this study, the researchers were trying to gauge what sorts of situational and circumstantial things might influence people's romantic interest in a stranger by measuring and manipulating a couple of things here. So dating status, like I said, was of the participant. So the participants were either exclusive daters or non-exclusive daters. Obviously, they didn't randomly assign people to that. They just measured it, asked them, are they exclusive or non-exclusive? And they thought that would be an important thing for people's reported romantic interest in a stranger. The other independent variable, the type of scenario, was manipulated, randomly assigned. The scenario they read about that hypothetical stranger was that the stranger was either interested or attracted to their friend or attracted to the participant. So in this study, you imagine you go in, you just kind of read a vignette about someone being attracted to you or your friend, and then you report how attracted or romantically interested you are in that stranger, basically. So again, you can kind of just see how these things are totally crossed. Have descriptions here that kind of show, they reflect that these are about exclusive daters, reading about someone attracted to their friend, and so on. In this particular study, these were, between subjects designs. So there were, either exclusive or non-exclusive daters, or either assigned to the attracted to friend or attracted to the participant themselves condition. So these are all between subjects independent variable conditions with mutually exclusive people between all these groups. But as we've talked about, this is not the only way to do these designs, right? For these types of variables, it makes sense, but it's not always the case that you're going to have independent groups designs. Just like with a t-test or an ANOVA, you can have an independent groups design where you're comparing two mutually exclusive groups of people that either have a particular characteristic or were assigned to have a particular situation. Or you could have repeated measures types of designs, where people are being measured on the same outcome multiple times under different circumstances. We've talked about the costs and benefits of these different things at length, obviously. The difference here in these factorial designs compared to just a simple single variable is that you can cross these things. You can have some independent variables that are between subjects and others that are within subjects. So, you can imagine having a design where, everybody is randomly assigned to one or the other condition, but then, maybe they are doing some sort of outcome variable. Everyone does it under other certain circumstances. So you might have people in high or low stress conditions that have to complete a test in a brightly lit room compared to a dimly lit room, for example. And everybody has to take it in both types of rooms, but everybody is only assigned to either the high stress or low stress condition. So the stress variable there would be between subjects or independent groups, and the dim light or higher light condition would be a within subjects variable, a repeated measures design, right? So you can cross these things together. And remember that independent groups, every condition, it has separate people. They're different, and we know some of the attributes of that. You need more participants, but you also are relying on random assignment to kind of control various things for you there, and you don't have to worry about anything like counterbalancing or crossover effects or practice or fatigue or anything like that. So there are benefits to these types of designs. For repeated measures, remember that people are doing the same things over and over again. You are going to end up needing fewer participants to get the same level of statistical power, but then your planning has to be more complicated because it might be unrealistic, or there might be, those carryover effects that come about with repeated measures designs. So you can do all independent groups, you can do all repeated measures, or you can do a mix of both of them, like the one I described with the stress and lighting conditions, where you have one or more independent variables that's within groups and one or more independent variables that is between groups. So this is in some ways kind of the best of both worlds. You need kind of a medium level of participants for these to get the same level of statistical power. You have to worry about counterbalancing for one variable but not the other. So it kind of splits the difference logistically. But I would say for the most part, you should be making these sorts of decisions based on, what type of variable you're selecting. Sometimes, like in the example from Bonazzi and Schaefer that I just talked about with exclusive and non-exclusive daters, you can't make that repeated measures unless you're doing like some crazy longitudinal study, right, where you're looking at people at different parts of their lives. That's always going to be independent groups because those people are in one group or the other, right? The other variable in that study, they also made independent groups. They randomly assigned people to one condition or the other, presumably because, people's first judgment about attractiveness to that stranger might affect their second judgment, right? But, you could have done repeated measures. It would be a little bit different. You need to worry about counterbalancing, but it's not impossible to do that. One example that happens to be kind of similar to the one I just came up with about testing, instead of stress, maybe let's say you're doing the color of the walls in a room, either yellow or blue, and you have level of lighting dim or bright. Again, just another example of how you can visualize these factorial designs in a 2x2. But just think about the different combinations of numbers of participants here. You might, let's say, have 20 people that participate in each of these different cells. If you had a completely within subjects design where everybody is doing each one of these cells, then you'd only have 20 participants, but they're doing this for different times, right? If you had a completely between subjects design, then each of these cells would be completely mutually exclusive people. These 20 people are different from these 20 people, and they're all different from these 20 people, and all different from these 20 people. So you'd have 80 participants if this were completely between subjects. Or if one variable was between subjects and one variable was within subjects, then you'd have 40 people in this study. Let's say these people are the same. They're taking the test in a yellow dim and a yellow bright room. These people are the same. They're taking a test in a blue dim room and then a blue blue bright room. So you can think about these things in different combinations. Back to the example from Bonazzi and Schaefer, they again are doing these both between subjects designs because dating status, they can't overlap there, and these ones they happen to randomly assign. So the example I'm choosing is all between subjects, but you can mix these things together just depending on the nature of your variables and how your research question works. Okay, so if we have some output on our dependent variables, if we have an outcome to actually look at, how do we tell how much these different variables matter and if they interact with one another, right? That's kind of what we're driving at eventually here, right? So let's say we have these ratings of attractiveness. They had kind of a goofy scale here. I don't remember exactly what the total scale was. Let's say it's like 0 to 15, a level of attractiveness to this stranger. So you have here exclusive daters who read that a stranger was attracted to their friend, and then they're expressing their romantic interest in that stranger. Exclusive daters who heard the stranger was attracted to themselves, making a rating here, and then the same for non-exclusive daters. Non-exclusive daters who heard they were attracted to the friend, non-exclusive daters who heard the stranger was attracted to them. So when you look at these outcomes, you can tell there's something going on here, that these numbers are differing in some perhaps interesting ways, but just by eyeballing these numbers, you might not know exactly how to interpret them. Like, which comparisons are worthwhile, or are there ways that we can look at, just the effect of the type of scenario, or just the effect of dating status, or how do they combine together, right? So I want to break this down into how exactly you can think about these things. Some more rudimentary ways of doing it, and then talking about some more, let's say, like official ways of doing it through statistical testing. So what do we do with all this information? Well, the first thing that we would want to do is look at just each independent variable by itself. These are called main effects. In any design, the number of main effects that you have is equal to the number of independent variables you have. So in this study, where we have dating status, exclusive or non-exclusive, and type of scenario, attracted to friend or attracted to participant, we have two main effects, the effect of dating status and the effect of who the stranger is attracted to, the type of situation. So the way you look at main effects is by collapsing things across those different groups and just kind of ignoring the other independent variable. So the two questions you might be asking: is there a difference in the romantic interest between exclusive daters and non-exclusive daters regardless of the situation they found themselves in? So that's the main effect for dating status. The other question you might ask: is there a difference in romantic interest based on the scenario they read? Attracted to friend versus attracted to self, the participant. That is the main effect of the scenario across the different dating statuses. So if you wanted to look at the main effect for dating status, you basically just ignore any differentiation from the type of scenario. You would take the average of these two things, adding all these up so it's all 50 people, not just taking the average of these two, but taking the average of all 50 people together of these exclusive daters. You would get a romantic interest rating of 9.52. If you looked at all the non-exclusive daters across both these conditions, all 48 of these people, you would get a mean a mean romantic interest rating of 10.54. So to look if dating status matters for people being attracted to a stranger, you would make this comparison, that it seems like non-exclusive daters, perhaps are more likely to be romantically interested in a stranger than people that are in a relationship and are exclusively dating some particular person. So, we're not doing a test here statistically, but the standard deviations for this on a 1 to 15 or whatever scale are, probably, or maybe getting up to like 2 or 2.5 at most, unless there's some weird measurement stuff. So a difference of 1 here is probably a pretty big difference. So these in this study, they were statistically significant. So if you did find that these were significant, then your conclusion about the main effect of dating status is that non-exclusive daters rated their romantic interests higher toward the stranger than did exclusive daters across these different types of scenarios. So the main effect for your first variable, dating status, seems to be significant and actually make a difference, or there is a main effect for dating status. Okay, so that's dating status. What about the other one? Well, we just do the same thing by collapsing across these different scenarios. the average rating of a romantic interest for a stranger that was attracted to someone's friend, just a little bit under 10 here. The average romantic interest for a stranger attracted to the participant themselves, just a little bit over 10. So these ones, kind of hard to tell just by eyeballing these numbers, right? They're closer than the other ones. They're only separated by like 0.29 instead of a whole point on the scale here. If you refer back to this article, they didn't find that there was a difference here. This was a non-significant difference between these two. So because you didn't find a difference here, you conclude about the main effect that regardless of dating status, people rated their romantic interest pretty similarly across these two conditions. Stranger attracted to friend didn't really make that much difference compared to stranger attracted to participant. Who they were attracted to didn't really matter. Maybe there were other things in the scenario that people read that kind of overrode this or something. So no main effect for type of scenario. The important thing here is to note that we don't really know yet if scenario didn't matter at all. So, I mean, think back to the method of loci versus control memory strategy thing that I talked about previously. You might conclude from that one of the variables doesn't matter, but that doesn't explore the whole picture, right? These main effects are only telling part of the story, just like you're only telling part of the story by focusing on a couple of those cells in the memory study. So we want to look back at the data and think a little bit more about how these variables interact with one another. So the way that we think a little bit past the main effects is to look at what we call the interaction. Remember that the effects of one variable might differ between different conditions of another variable. The number of interactions that you have depends on how many independent variables you have. And it is every possible combination that you can put together is an interaction. So if you have two independent variables like this one, the example we've been working with, you have one two-way interaction. Dating status of the participant by the scenario that they read, right? That's a single two-way interaction in addition to those two main effects. But this, as has kind of become a theme in this class, as you add complexity, it gets more complicated very quickly. If you have three independent variables, it's not just that you have one additional interaction or something. It gets a lot more complicated. You have a three-way interaction that maybe all of these variables combine in some unique way to affect your outcome. An A by B by C interaction in this case. And you also have three other possibilities. You have A by B, A by C, and B by C. So when you have three independent variables that might all interact with one another, then you have four possible interactions. So you see how this kind of snowballs relatively quickly. I don't have this up here to show right now, but if you had four independent variables, then you have a four-way interaction and three-way interactions and two-way interactions. So it gets, again, complicated relatively quickly. In the scenario that we've been using so far in the Bonazzi and Schaefer paper, we, again, only have this single two-way interaction. So is there an interaction between dating status and type of scenario read? Is there something that makes this set of variables more than the sum of their parts, that tells us something different from those two main effects by themselves? One way that you can look at this and try to determine if there is some sort of interaction going on is by using this relatively straightforward method of just taking differences in one direction or the other. You could do it in this horizontal direction by subtracting 9.25 from 9.77 and then subtracting 11.13 from 10. So those, you can imagine those differences here. But doesn't really matter which way you do it, it tells you something about those variables having different effects on another. In this case, the difference between this cell 9.77 and this cell 10 shows us a difference of 0.23, and the difference here from 9.25 to 11.13 is almost 2. So this indicates to us that there's something beyond those main effects going on. That the effect of dating status seems to be really big if the stranger is attracted to the participant. So the effect of dating status doesn't really seem to matter here. There's not much of a difference when the stranger is attracted to a friend. So even though the main effect told us that the type of scenario didn't matter across both of these conditions, the main effect was negligible, the type of scenario does seem to change the effect of dating status. That when a stranger is attracted to a friend, dating status doesn't really matter. But when the stranger is attracted to the participant, dating status matters a lot. So type of scenario affects dating status. The level here affects how dating status influences the romantic interest. So this is, again, really kind of difficult to interpret just from looking at these cells by themselves, or even from looking at these differences between means. The two better ways of looking at whether an interaction matters are looking at interactions visually or graphically, or more properly, and looking at them statistically. These two things together are going to be really helpful in understanding what an interaction is like. If you only looked at it graphically, then you might not know for sure if they are statistically significant. And if you only look at the output of a statistical test, then it's kind of abstract and difficult to understand what the interaction actually means practically. So I'm going to go through in the next video how you can look at interactions graphically and look at them statistically.